story of Yosef and his help to the prisoner that was with him, whose dream he interpreted. Excuse me. What happened? Was it the baker? I forgot now. So what happened? The baker goes back to work. He's back in the good stead, and he forgets what Yosef had done.
No, the other
for
one,
him.
the steward, the wine pourer.
Oh, the steward.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yeah,
the baker was hung.
Forgetful. Yeah, the baker was hung. The steward goes back, but he forgets Yosef, and I think this is the whole story of what happens because when Yosef dies eventually at the age of 110, which, by the way, the prime minister, who I believe is called Imhotep, but he's also called Imhotep, who we have his writings today that have been handed down through the centuries. He thanks God for giving him 110 years of life, the same number of years
that is incredible,
that Yosef lived. And in fact, there is a saying that was handed down through the centuries of Egypt that to attain perfect wisdom and perfection in everything is to live to the age of 110.
Wow.
So
that's almost what the Jews say, which is that you should live to be 120 like Moshe.
Yeah. So the problem is that after Yosef dies, we're going to see in subsequent Torah portions, is that what happens? They forget Joseph. Not the Jews, of course, but the people who were the benefit of his wisdom that came from Hashem, that saved the country, and not only saved it for a while morally because of his saying that you can have grain if you become circumcised, of bringing about that level of purity. All that was forgotten with the passing and the introduction of a new family of pharaohs into Egypt who didn't know Joseph.
But you know the famous argument of our sages: either it was a new king who didn't know him, or it was a king who decided that it's no longer politically expedient for him to recognize Yosef, so he didn't know him anymore. In either case, it's so strange because even if it was a new king, I mean, how could the memory of Yosef one generation later be totally uprooted when the man single-handedly saved the entire nation?
Yeah, I think both opinions are right. I think that it was, from my research, it was a new family, it was a new dynasty. And somebody came forward and said, by the way, the reason that we have so many of these people that have practiced this different religion and this different idea, and we even had a prime minister who was not even an Egyptian. In fact, he was a commoner. He'd been in prison. And by the way, this Egyptian figure known as Imhotep was known as a commoner who rose up through the ranks to become prime minister. Unheard of, by the way, in Egyptian history at any other time. The point being is that they, the sages tell that there was palace intrigue going on, and that the idea was that the nobility surrounding the throne, the rich Egyptians who were the people who influenced the crown, they said, you cannot keep the idea of this Yosef, of this Hebrew who was in our midst for a while around the country. You cannot let his memory be to sway you, and you just need to forget about it. In fact, they threatened to take away his throne. They threatened a coup. And that is even remembered in a tomb in ancient Egypt, that a prime minister actually tried to take over and actually had the nobility around him.
So do I understand you correctly that you're saying that the historical research that you've looked at would indicate that it was a new king, and that he actually was kind of like made an offer that he couldn't refuse, like he wanted to remember Yosef, but there were other powers that prevented him from...
It's not that they wanted to, it's just that they wanted to nip that in the bud.
I see.
And by the way, this new king, was put on the throne at the age of I think 6 years old. So his mother, in essence, co-ruled with him. So it was easy to manipulate him. So by the time he was an adult, he had completely forgotten about this guy. But a previous king, whose name I remember at this point, King Pharaoh Unas, if you go to the Louvre in Paris today, you can see these reliefs that were taken from his causeway, and the reliefs actually show starving foreigners in the procession way that went up to his tomb. He remembered a time when starving foreigners came to Egypt for food. And in my research, he would have been one of the pharaohs who either was the last pharaoh that Yosef was prime minister for, or immediately after Yosef's death, before this new family came in. So it gets a little complicated, and I suggest people watch my documentary.
This is why people should be listening to our podcast and not the other podcasts that have all these crazy people on them. They should be listening to our podcast because we have a professional Egyptologist in-house.
No, I'm not a professional. I'm a filmmaker who does his homework.
Oh gosh.
So anyway,
don't be modest.
I don't want to derail the discussion, but the point is that all these things are, as we're trying to point out to our audience, is that all these things are an echo of Yosef and how his own idea of wisdom given to him by his father, who taught him the tenets that now became embodied in Torah. The wisdom of Hashem and his beauty were used to save a nation.
Exactly.
And the parallel is that in the time of the Maccabees, the Maccabees, is that the reverse happened. They tried to take what the Greeks called truth and what they called beauty, and they turned it into a tool of oppression against Torah observant Jews.
Exactly.